what's the difference between digital identity and identity and access management? This is a question we've asked multiple times to many people around the world, and I've never heard the same answer twice. So I'm curious to see what your interpretation of here's what digital identity is, and then here's what identity and access management is.
Well, I think the clue is kind of just in the words there is kind of digital identities, your identity in this kind of digital world that we now live in, because everything has an identity. So that's why this year at EIC, we're focusing on non-human identity, because just about everything that transacts has an identity. So we've got to deal with human and non-human identities. And then digital identity and access management is kind of really is managing those identities. So make sure that these identities are have the correct governance around them, and that they have the correct policies around them. So I kind of see them as being very closely related. But digital identity is kind of general concept. This is about being able to kind of identify people and things in the context of a digital transaction. And the management part is just managing those identities to make sure that they kind of fasten down and that there is correct governance and policy around them. So I don't know, maybe I've misunderstood the question, but for me, that's kind of the way that falls out in my head.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
I'm doing great. I think this is episode, 338?
338.
Yeah, it's weeks like this that make me reflect on how big a deal that is, that we haven't missed weeks. I mean, my work calendar has been absolutely slammed. Our guest today, I had to reschedule this meeting twice. So this was third try. I guess third try's the charm since we're all here. I also noticed, and this is a big thank you to our listeners, we had 600,000 downloads or plays on the audio version of the podcast. So Thanks for everyone who's listening.
Yeah. I was a little bit delinquent in getting that out there onto our LinkedIn, but 600,000, who would have thought? And we had 500,000 in December at Gartner, because if you missed our session at Gartner where we were on stage with, I had mentioned that we had just recently crossed 500,000. So yeah, we're picking up steam still, which is amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. And I think the formula for us has been consistency and great guests. So we have a great guest today. We stay consistent in terms of putting out an episode every Monday. We're also on YouTube now, so that's not even counted in that statistic. But if you want to see us, you want to see our guests, I know this format's not great for video, right? An hour long, just looking at people talking to each other, but at least it's an option if you're into it.
I think some people like it, some people don't. We'll keep doing it for now and see how it goes. But I mean, where else can you get the silky smooth sounds of my voice and your voice, and the faces for radio that we decided to put on YouTube anyway. So yeah, it's fun. We'll keep doing it, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I think also one of the biggest things that we've done and we're going to continue to do is put discount codes out there, because I think if you're planning on going to a conference, you have an opportunity to go to a conference, you might as well listen to the podcast at our website. I noticed you moved all the discount codes right to the homepage, idacpodcast.com. Go right there. All the discount codes are there. And you can save big money on conference attendance.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. A lot of these conferences partner with us to provide those discounts, so we're always grateful for that and pass the love and the savings on. So yeah, go to idacpodcast.com. Just scroll down below the listen and watch buttons, and you'll see anything that we've got currently active. Sometimes we get them sooner rather than later, so you want to kind of keep an eye out. If there's a conference coming up that you are attending or looking to attend and you don't see on the list, reach out. Maybe we can use our popularity or whatever it is, right, to see if we can get a discount code for that one and kind of show the love. But that was Jim, I am very impressed because that was almost a professional segue into reading these discount codes.
Well, after episode 337, it finally clicked.
Well, let's read for those because we got a couple that we're going to talk about. The first one is the one that really this episode's focused on. That's in Berlin. It's the European Identity and Cloud Conference. That is May 6th through 9th in Berlin, as I mentioned. If you use the code IDAC25MKO, that'll save you 25%. Definitely want to take advantage of that before time runs out on it. And we hope to see folks there. Won't spend too much on that right now because we want to get to our guest of Warwick here in a second. But the other one that we've got is Identiverse. So right after EIC, a couple weeks later, you and I will be at Identiverse. That's in Las Vegas, June 3rd to the 6th. And if you use the code IDV25-IDAC25, 25% off for them as well. Starting to see a trend here. Don't worry about trying to remember these. Again, they'll be on our website. Also put them in the show notes for people to check out, whether you're on the YouTube description or the podcast player, whatever it may be. But looking forward to both of those. We have some exciting things planned for both events. And as we've mentioned, I think now for like the last, 4 or 5 months, this is our first time going to Berlin for EIC. So it's been a while since I've been a rookie at a conference. So I think this conversation that we're going to have today will hopefully help with that. Anything else, Jim, you want to mention, or should we get right to it?
I think we get right to it. I did want to mention that I'm going to Europe the week before, so we're making the most out of this trip, right? So I'm going to go to Oslo, Norway, and do Identibeer there with the local Identirati, and then I'll be moving on to spend the weekend in Copenhagen. I think that's going to be just R&R, and then to Berlin. So 3 places I've never been. Really excited about that. That's another thing that rarely happens, right? Because we've been crisscrossing this country for so long, and we do spend most of our time in the country. To go somewhere and it's going to be all new places, that's going to be pretty fun.
Yeah, I love to travel, especially places I've never been before. So I am definitely looking forward to it. But why don't we get to our guest? His name is Warwick Ashford. He's a senior analyst at KuppingerCole Analysts. Welcome to the show, Warwick.
Thanks for having me, Jim, Jeff.
Yeah, so thanks for taking the time. This is a conversation that's very timely for us because as we just said, we are newbies and rookies, not only for EIC, but I think probably for Berlin as well. But before we get too far into like previewing EIC, it's tradition around here when the first time you come on our show is we like to find a little bit about backgrounds of people. And I kind of joked, before we hit record, it's like, hey, is it cybersecurity, is it identity? And usually the question is, how did you get into identity? I'm not so sure if you think of yourself as an identity person. So maybe the question is, how did you get into cybersecurity and or identity? Is it something that you chose or did it choose you?
Oh, well, that's always the question that I think is very interesting, how people end up doing things that inevitably kind of choose them. But I'm only focused on cybersecurity. I spent 20 odd years in cybersecurity journalism, but as part of that, I was attending EIC, and that's kind of was my first contact with as you mentioned, the identity of the world. And identity is really at the center of cybersecurity. See what I did there? And so really, you can't really divorce identity from security. So that's why, although I write mainly and research mainly around cybersecurity, identity is always there as a theme and is always there as an interest. So, and I do write around the topic from time to time. I've done a little bit around IGA and software as a service management and IGA, and also managing non-human identities. But more recently, I've been focused on cybersecurity topics. Apart from EIC, of course, I've spent quite a lot of time focused on identity topics and helping to put together the agenda, working as part of the agenda team. So although I'm one of the analysts at KuppingerCole Analysts, I also work with the agenda team as part of the larger events team and as one of the inputs on sort of what kind of content we should have and the kinds of people we should have at the event.
So this topic of cybersecurity that you cover is very broad, obviously, so it covers a lot of things. Is there a specific area of cybersecurity that either is of great interest, or maybe it's more of a cycle or a focus? It's like, okay, right now this seems to be kind of the area of cybersecurity that really is interesting versus maybe a couple of years ago was something else. I'd love to understand kind of how you approach cybersecurity, just because it's such a broad space.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is an extremely broad space. It's also a very exciting space. I think when I was working as a journalist, I was the envy of my colleagues because they always sort of felt that I was the one who was getting most hits because I had the more interesting topic. People were more interested in things that were happening in the cybersecurity space than perhaps, kind of software management or something kind of more pedestrian. But whereas at KuppingerCole, we are trying to cover as many of the really important topics as we can. Obviously, that's changing as we now get kind of more into the world of AI, and there's a huger focus on things like ITDR. But personally, most recently, I've done a report on managed detection and response. And so that's kind of very interesting for me. And I'm quite excited about it, just simply because it does involve the whole question of identity, but it also looks at the whole way we're using AI in security. And I think that in time, more and more people will consume security as a service, or as a managed service of some kind, because really nobody's got time to focus on the rapid changes in the cybersecurity world. They're kind of trying to focus on their core business, right? They're not security experts. So I think that this whole idea of just being able to hand it off to a third party who have the resources, who have the team of tier 1, 2, 3 analysts who are able to make sense of what the AI is crunching down for them. I think that's a definite trend. I mean, you speak to some of the bigger organizations that go, oh, no, we'll never go. It's the managed services. And like, I like to keep everything in-house and I like to do it all myself. But I think the reality is that it's just becoming too big for any one company or any in-house team to deal with. And so I'm really expecting to see managed services as being kind of the long-term trend, to be honest.
So that idea of managed services is something that I see come up quite a bit. It can be expensive, but I guess what is the alternative? Is it, well, hackers, if you're going to attack us, please only do it during business hours of 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Thank you very much. Right? That's not how it works. So, and I guess for full disclosure, right, the company that Jim and I work for, RSM, right, we do some of that work as well. But I do hear this conversation come up quite a bit of this idea of 24/7 SOCs and, managed responses and things like that. I'm always curious to hear from people who are covering the space. How do people justify, I guess, the spend to get to that? Because these services typically are not cheap, but the alternative could be far, far worse. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think that the trend, like the explanation that you can give is that getting the talent and having the team on site, that's really expensive. And it's difficult. I mean, it's really difficult to find the right people at the right time. So whereas if you go the managed services route, you have access to an experienced team who are following all the latest trends, who've got multiple sources of input, have got all the kind of intel that they need, without you having to keep them on a monthly payroll. They're just there when you need them. And so I think that makes huge amount of sense, really.
Hey, Warwick, I'd like to shift topics to EIC because that's really what we want to get into in this episode. What can we expect? Okay, we're newbies. I know there are a lot of people who have been there before who are coming again. So maybe you can kind of address that question for both types of people. So someone who's never been there before, but what's also different this year than years past?
Well, I would say that I think EIC is pretty awesome. It aims to be comprehensive. It also aims to be influential. I mean, a lot of the people there are standards writers and are working on the standards bodies and are actually working to shape identity. And then a lot of it's around collaboration and forward-looking as to what's coming down the track. So this year, I mean, is the 18th EIC, and so as I always say that I sound biased towards EIC in saying really that it's an awesome event, but I've been attending it for about 10 years, although I've only been working for KuppingerCole Analysts for the past 5 years, and I've only been involved in the agenda team for the past 2 years. And so I have kind of a third party or an outside perspective. And when I was attending the event as a cybersecurity journalist, I was always terribly impressed by the content. And I was also terribly impressed by the fact that there was a community of identity professionals who all kind of knew each other, but lots of new relationships were made. So I think that's one of the most important things. And as we're the agenda team, especially when we talk to prospective contributors, we say, well, we almost consider what happens off stage and in the corridors and in over the lunch meetings as important, if not more important, than what's actually happening on the stage.
Totally agree. Yeah, I mean, that's something Jeff and I say all the time, is that the big benefit for conferences is the hallway conversations. The people you meet, it's, just, over a beer or in the hallway over a coffee, just hearing people's stories, doing the same things that you're doing, but maybe they're a step ahead of you, or you sharing that information and potentially helping someone else. But I'm wondering, so I haven't been to EIC. Who is the conference for? Is it for the practitioner? Is it mostly for vendors, or who gets the most benefit? And then I'm going to throw this at you as well. Does geography make a difference? So if you're outside of Europe, is this a good conference to attend, and why?
Yeah, that's quite a lot. Let me start with who the attendees. I mean, as I said, we have, there are standards writers, there are also policy makers, but most of the people are identity practitioners or people who are working, and then there are also identity community celebrities or identirati, as you call them. So that just means that it's a really good mix of attendees, and that ordinary practitioners get to kind of either be in the same room with and potentially get to meet people who are writing the standards or are setting the policies, and kind of get to understand, how that impacts their day-to-day business. Sorry, I can't remember. What was the second part of your question? Was around,
it's really around, it's a European Identity and Cloud Conference. So is it only for people in Europe for the most part?
Absolutely not. I think you guys will agree that, the identity issues that are being faced in the US and North America are close, the same all around the world. So at the European Identity Conference, we're obviously going to focus on things like EIDAS and looking at what's been done within the European context. But that sort of informs the thinking elsewhere in the world anyway. I don't think I don't think it's a good idea that people are working in isolation. And I think the identity community in general doesn't tend to work in isolation. But that said, we do have an international component, and that has been increasing over the past couple of years. And so this year we have people from all over North America, South America, Australia, Japan. We have quite a large contingent from Japan coming this year, looking at projects that they're doing in terms of interoperability and getting international identity standards. So I think the global component is just only increasing. So I would say it's definitely not for only people in Europe. I mean, obviously, those who are interested in what is happening in Europe and who want to learn from what is happening in Europe, that's also a good idea too, but by no means just for European attendees.
Well, that sounds great. I think one of the things that I'm really looking forward to is I love reading the reports that KuppingerCole Analysts puts out. I see a lot of the analysts are speaking at the conference, so that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to, is what are those presentations going to be like? Are there any main themes for the conference this year? Does anything stand out as like that's one of the tracks or a theme that the conference has?
Well, it's sort of we try to look at building the infrastructure, building the ecosystem. So that's kind of not that we want to not that every presentation speaks to the theme, but we've really tried to bring out the whole topic of the necessity of building an ecosystem, because it's all very well saying, okay, we've got a paradigm shift in identity and we need to take care of things like AI and identity and all these other kinds of things, and we need to go decentralized and we need to this and we need to that. But if there's no sort of ecosystem to support this, and there are no kind of business models being developed behind this, then there's no kind of no, you're not going to make any progress. So we've tried to kind of focus on that. But I mean, just to get back to the beginning, really, you can expect 4 days of really solid content. There are going to be 7 workshops. There are 5 streams. Again, I hesitate to use the word track or themes, but we've organized it around 5 topic areas, and I'll go into those in more detail maybe a bit later. But there are about more than 200 presentations. I counted up, and there are like 37 keynote presentations. And these are not just strategic and technical insights. So it's not just strategic or just technical, but it's both. But as I said earlier, it's about shaping the future of identity and, that whole thing of engaging with peers, and then sort of meeting people who are community leaders. And then, of course, there's the show floor. There's an opportunity to speak to the sponsors and to see how the vendors are innovating and just get an idea of where they're going. So there's kind of all of that. And then, if I can go into detail about the streams. So we've got 5 different streams. One we're calling Upgrade Reality, for want of a better word. And that's the one in which we're going to be looking at AI and identity. So we're going to be looking at all the sort of identity challenges in an AI-driven world. And then one of the sessions I'm particularly looking forward to is the one on sort of personhood credentials. There's been quite a bit of interest in that on social media. Quite a few people have been contributing on the idea of personhood and having credentials that kind of support that. So that's a whole consideration of the way AI is influencing identity. And obviously we have the security track, and that was the track that I was most closely involved, or one of the tracks that I was most closely involved in putting together. And we're obviously looking there at security and identity, and topics like zero trust identity and identity-centric security. And then this year we're also having a look at securing identity in the post-quantum era, because, of course, we're not only having to do it with the old sort of deal, but we've now got coming down the track quantum computing, which may change the story quite a bit. Then we have a trends and innovation sort of stream, and that's where we're going to be looking at non-human identity, which I think is a very interesting topic, and maybe we can get onto that in a little bit more depth later. Then, as I said, identity ecosystems, which is kind of really supporting the main theme of this year's conference. Modern authorization approaches, so Auth Z, as you guys would probably say. I just kind of get used to saying Z instead of Z, but anyway. We got passwordless, and
you can
and
take the boy out of London, but you can't take London out of the boy.
Sort of, as one of my former colleagues, US colleagues, used to say, never have 2 nations been more divided by a common language. And then this year also, we've put a lot of influence on inclusivity in identity, and maybe later I can talk about some of the kind of the keynotes that we've got around that. And then the next stream that we can look at is inside the enterprise. So this is kind of core IAM topics. So just anything to do with IAM, IGA, compliance, CIAM or CM. I don't know which you guys prefer. And then we're also going to be looking at modernizing legacy IAM, because I think this is a challenge that a lot of organizations have got, is that they've invested heavily in IAM systems, and now suddenly the world is changing. Everything's based on digital services. It's services based, and not to mention the kind of AI thing again. So they're having to kind of take what they have and kind of modernize that legacy IAM and make it relevant today. And then one of the kind of most important tracks, I think, is beyond the enterprise. Now, this is where we're looking kind of at IAM, but in the world, we want to kind of written large. And so this is where we're looking at all the latest EIDAS 2 issues. Obviously, that is important for Europe. But as I said earlier, I think this is something that the rest of the world can learn from. I think what they're doing or what we're doing in Europe can really inform what the rest of the world is doing, and we can sort of help inform the conversations about how to make these things work together. And then, that again speaks to the theme of ecosystems that are interoperable and standards that are interoperable. And so decentralized identity is going to be a big topic in that thing, in that stream. And then, of course, there is the identity wallets, and we're also looking at travel credentials, which I find a really fascinating area. One of the speakers that we have there is, of course, Annette Steenbergen, and she's brought together a really interesting group of people from the travel industry. They're going to be talking about travel credentials and the kind of issues that they've got there, and sort of this progress that they've been making. And then global standards for digital identity. I think, ultimately we all kind of transact with each other, and it is global, and we're seeing increasing globalization of all kinds. So, the digital identity has got to kind of catch up with that.
You had a little bit of something for everyone, it sounds like. I mean, it's a real smorgasbord of identity topics. I love that. And it's going to bring a lot of different perspectives together. And I think it's this idea of ecosystems that kind of brings it together. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what the identity ecosystems are, or how people should think about that? Since that's like the overarching theme of the conference.
Well, Martin Kuppinger, our principal analyst, touched on this on his keynote last year, is the idea of that the back-end systems are going to be developed to be able to consume decentralized identities. And I think the consensus is that decentralized identity is kind of the way we're going to go. I mean, we used to speak about self-sovereign identity, but we've kind of standardized on the term of decentralized identity, because I think it's more encompassing and it's kind of less emotive, perhaps, than self-sovereign identity. And so we've got to make sure that organizations are able to consume these, because I think a lot of organizations that are sort of testing the waters of decentralized identity are doing it, but in an in-house version, a closed loop version. To get the real value out of it, it's got to be cross organization and also international. So we need to start looking at ways of how are we going to make sure that organizations can consume these, and then that speaks to standards and all that kind of thing. And then obviously the other component that I just mentioned briefly earlier is the whole idea of business models. How are things like identity wallets going to work? Who's going to how the transactions going to happen, and what is the business model behind that. So this is kind of the thing we mean by all the sort of things that have got to work together: the ecosystem, sort of the economic ecosystem, and the standards ecosystem, and that sort of thing. So yeah.
This idea of decentralized identity I find very interesting, because you mentioned this example of people testing it, right, internally on some of their own thing. I mean, to me, that sounds like I'm just standing up at yet another identity store. Isn't sort of the idea of decentralized identity to have these be credentials or other parts of an identity that are not centrally stored? Example, decentralized, right? But if I control it as an organization, I don't really consider that decentralized. I think I'm thinking more of like education or finance or government or civic or whatever you want to call it, that perspective. But I just worry about, okay, well, we stood up our own blockchain, and it feels like it's a little bit self-defeating if that's the way that people are looking at it, which I don't think is the way to approach it, right?
No, well, you're right, and I think when I say when they're using it in-house is across organizations. So these are kind of multinational organizations. So it's a single company, but it's across several regions in the world. So they've got, it's a way of just testing it out and trying to see how it would work, because until you've got the interoperability, and it's a bit like electric vehicles, right? I recently bought a new car, and I went, well, do I go electric? So I ended up kind of doing the safe thing. I went hybrid. So I feel like I've kind of put my toe in the 21st century, but I haven't entirely committed myself to an electric vehicle. I'm kind of getting the benefits of a lower tax and better economy, but I don't feel like the ecosystem is there yet. I don't feel that the infrastructure is there yet. So it's kind of just a way of getting into something and getting your people and processes to think in terms of decentralized identity without committing to it in a way that it's just not practical to work. So does that make sense?
I love that. That is the most brilliant way that I think of anybody has explained it to me. And I love the EV analogy. I'm an EV guy. So that totally makes sense. Yes, the infrastructure needs to be in place for things like that. And it's no different from an identity standpoint, especially for decentralized. If we're going to start hooking things up, we do have to build sort of that infrastructure. But bravo, man. That was a well done example. That definitely you hit your target audience right here with the EV thing.
I'm glad. And then we're also going to be doing a couple of workshops, and I think there's one that you may be interested in. I think, Jim, you were saying you were interested in the identity fabrics. KuppingerCole is going to be presenting a workshop on designing identity fabrics. So this is kind of way organizations can actually design an identity sort of network for themselves so that it kind of works well for them and themselves. So it's meant to be kind of hands-on. So therefore it's a workshop. And then we're going to have a presentation from a workshop, from ID Pro on how to find and educate your IAM team. So that should be pretty good. And then we've also got a workshop from Wittcon on building a secure AI stack to protect data and IP. And then Swisscom is helping with a workshop on establishing trust, because I think trust is another big central topic and theme of EIC from the past couple of years, because that's really what it comes down to is establishing trust. And I think that's part of the whole ecosystem story too, is that without trust, we can't really make progress with decentralized or whatever it is that we're trying to do within the identity space. And then Kantara this year are doing a workshop on the certification of digital credential services. So this is getting your digital credential services recognized as being kind of functional in the world. So a couple of really good workshops there to attend. And I'd recommend the one on obviously designing identity fabrics, because we like to think that we were kind of one of the first organizations that were talking about this idea of an identity fabric that is services based and have all the different components that work together to sort of weave together a fabric. And then it seems to have kind of taken on resonance with the rest of the community, because I see more and more people seem to be speaking about identity fabrics now. So we're doubling down on that, and that's why it's quite a big focus. I know that Martin Kuppinger is going to be presenting on his research into vendors that support identity fabrics or provide technologies that enable organizations to put together the identity fabric. So that'll be one of his sessions apart from his keynote session. So that also might be worth going along to. And as I say, we've got quite a few organizations. I mentioned OpenID Foundation and Kantara. And this year we've also got some involvement from the UNHCR, which we can talk about a bit later perhaps. And then also the Decentralized Identity Foundation. We've got quite a few presentations from the folks at DIF, which is great. And then this year we've also, as last year and previous years, we've got representation from the Digital Identity Advancement Foundation. I know you guys are very familiar with them. Both Ian Glazer and Alan Foster will be on site. And so the kind of fun thing for us too is that they brought along two of their the DF award winners. We've got Grace Klutker, who is a Cameron Award winner, and she's going to be doing a panel discussion, as is Eric Dominguez, who is a Victoria Bertocci Award winner, and so the Kim Cameron Awards, which I'm sure I know you're aware of, aims to foster the professional development of identity practitioners, and the Victoria Bertocci Award focuses on inspiring and supporting the next generation of identity experts. And so we were very keen to get behind these two awards, because obviously Kim Cameron and Victoria were kind of key speakers at past EICs, and they will long be remembered as being really important parts of the community. And Victoria was always fun to introduce on stage. I mean, he was just a fantastic human being, very knowledgeable, obviously, in the identity space, but he was a lot of fun to have on stage, and I always had great answers for things. So, we're very pleased to get behind these awards.
Yeah, we are always very keen to get behind the awards. We're big supporters of DIAF. And we usually take the award winners to try to get them on the show. So, for example, episode 312, we had the Kim Cameron Award winner, Grace Kluge, on and interviewed her. And I thought it was one of the coolest episodes, and it wound up being a big hit in terms of number of people who listened to it. Wanted to ask a little bit about the after hours, because that's always one of the things that makes the conference real fun. But for people who can't be there on site, I noticed on the website that there is a virtual ticket option. Can you talk a little bit about the virtual ticket option?
This is kind of one of the differentiators, I think, for EIC, or one of the things that kind of makes it fairly unusual. Thanks to COVID, we've got a lot to thank COVID for in terms of kind of just the way people work and think and so on. So thanks to COVID now, all the streams all the presentations are put on video stream. So this means that people who have got a full conference ticket can not, they don't have to be on site sort of every single minute of the day. But the other great thing is that they don't have to make that awful conference. I know you're also familiar with this problem. You go to a conference and you look at the agenda, you think, oh, damn, there's this person speaking on this topic, and at the very same time, there's this person speaking on the topic. I really want to go to both, and I can't make up my mind. And then you decide to go to one, and then all while you're sitting there, you think, oh, damn, maybe I should have gone to the other. Anyway, so that's one of the really great things about EIC, is that you don't have to make that decision, because if you have a full ticket, you have got access to all the sessions after the event. So you can decide which ones you want to see live, and then all the ones that you would like to have seen and weren't able to do just because of time and space, you can catch up. So I think that's one of the kind of key benefits of EIC.
I think I'll be in that boat. And again, we've got the discount code that we've covered in the beginning of the show. So if you're interested in the virtual ticket option, or you can't be there physically, that's an option for you. I did want to talk a little bit about kind of the after hours opportunity. I hear there's a dinner cruise or a river cruise. It's only a rumor to me so far, because I haven't actually seen anything about this, but I want to make sure I get registered in time.
Yeah, no. So that'll be via the app. That's the important thing, to make sure that you have the app downloaded and that you kind of interact that way. There are actually this year there are 2 boats, because in previous years the demand has been so high. So this is a Spray River cruise. It's just kind of cruising down the Spray River, which runs through the center of Berlin, going past all the kind of main sites that are along the river. But each of the 2 boats are being sponsored this year. So you simply have to contact the sponsors and just ask for an invitation. And actually, you'll kind of make the cut. I think it's on a first come, first served basis. So you want to make sure that as soon as you get on site, you make your application for that. And then if you don't make the first cut, then there's always the hope that on the evening that there are people who don't take up their invitation, and then
the waiting list.
Yeah, there's kind of like a last minute waiting list. But the best course of action would be to get registered as soon as you can, and to make sure that you will that you'll be on one of the 2 cruises anyway.
That's one of the best things about conferences, I think, is like all this stuff that takes place outside of the hours. Those are when you have really good conversations and can kind of get fun events. So would definitely encourage people to get out there, right, and enjoy sort of the events, right, that take place. So that, I love that pro tip of getting the app and making sure that you register. So I wasn't sure how to set this up. So hopefully I'll see people on a cruise one of those nights. I want to do a little bit of a lightning round with you, because I know we've got just a couple minutes left here.
Oh goodness, because I mean, there's just so much more I can talk about because
I know
I didn't talk about the happy hours. I didn't talk about the women in identity lunch. I didn't talk about the drinks receptions. We just talked about the Spray River cruise. I mean, that's kind of yeah. And of course, there's the 5 kilometer morning run, which I'm sure you guys are going to be on. I mean, I know I'm not. I mean,
yeah, I'll be passing on that one. But there's a little bit something for everybody. Like you said, there's a wide variety of things that people can attend and make themselves available for. And
well, we've got the EIC. We've also got. We haven't talked about the EIC Awards either, because we are having the EIC Awards thing where people can enter into the kind of 2 categories. Of digital ID and enterprise IAM. They can enter I think the entries are closed, but we've received entries for under those 2 categories. And then this is also kind of a fun thing too. Even we at this stage don't know who the winner is going to be. And so one of the part of the prize is that if you win either of these 2 awards, these EIC awards, you get to present on Thursday. So this will all be announced on the first evening, which is Tuesday evening. Once that's announced, then those winners will have a day or so to put together a presentation, and then so it's kind of like a wild card almost entry onto the agenda. So that's quite.
Wait, hold on a second. You announce a winner on a Monday, and then they have a couple days
on Tuesday, and
then they only have a couple of days, so they don't know about this ahead of time.
Well, I guess
I can't think of anything more terrifying than be like, "Hey, by the way, you're giving a presentation in 2 days to everybody."
Well, they'll know that they're a finalist, right? So I mean, I guess that anybody who's a finalist, it's a bit like going to the Oscars, really. I mean, you're not going to go without a speech, are you? You're not going to go without sort of an acceptance speech, because who knows, it could be your night. So you're going to. So that's another thing, the EIC Awards. And I don't know, we clipped through the time really quickly because I also wanted to talk about some of the kind of people who are going to be there this year. I mean, I'm really excited about the fact that we've got Volker Schimmel, who's the head of the Global Data Services at the UNHCR, and he's going to be talking about rolling out the agency's next generation digital ID systems for refugees, which I think is really fascinating, and I'm glad that we were able to include them. We've also got Paul Toomey, who's the co-chair of the Global Initiative for Digital Empowerment Guide, and he's going to be looking at a proposal for the next stage of the European digital ecosystem. So there you have on the theme. And once again this year, we're going to be joined by Max Schrems. So I'm sure everybody knows who he is, certainly in Europe, as the privacy activist who took on and won with Facebook. We've got Dr. Torsten Lodderstedt, who's the lead architect for Germany's EU digital identity wallet. And he's from Sprint, and he'll be joined by Christina Yasuda, who's the identity systems architect. And they're going to be talking on the power of digital sovereignty. And I just love Sprint. It's the German Federal Agency for Disruptive Innovation. I mean, isn't that a cool title for a government agency? I think it's a really cool title.
That's definitely a top tier one for sure.
I mean, of course, we've also got all the usual suspects. I mean, we've got Dr. Michael Jones, and we've got Eve Mahler and Ian Glazer, as I've already mentioned, Katrina Dow. So all the kind of favorites. We've even got a UK civil servant who's coming from the government department specializing in digital identity and technology policy, and so that's going to be good. And Max Imbil, who's one of Germany's top CISOs. So there's going to be the crossover of security and IAM, because, I mean, he's a CISO, but he's going to be talking about the future of IAM. So that should be he's an excellent speaker. So that should be good. And Daniel Niesler, he's going to be talking on AI state management. So, plenty of cool people to look out for as well.
I mean, that's like a heavy hitter lineup. I mean, and I'm glad that you mentioned that things are going to be recorded and streamed and stuff like that, because I definitely fall into that category of like, oh my gosh, there's like 8 different events or 8 different topics I want to see all at the same time. So being able to catch all this is going to be a lot of good airport and flying material as we're going through the skies there. So I'm really happy about that. I'm perfectly happy. We can keep going on EIC if there's other things that you think that you want to get the word out and make sure people are aware of.
Yeah, well, I think you also asked about the tips for first timers. I mean, I'd just say plan your time ahead of the event. Make sure you use the app to plan the sessions and book meetings. The app, which I don't think is live just yet, will allow you to book with other attendees or request meetings with other attendees. So it's very much around this whole networking idea and kind of socializing. And then of course, as I said, you'll be able to request your place on one of the two Spray River cruises. So that's not to be missed. I think we've kind of covered most of the things that I wanted to talk about. I mean, just kind of looking at what I consider to be the differentiators. I mean, although there is that strong European the strong European focus, there is it's increasingly global. And then I think the thing about EIC is it's kind of big without being massive, so it's kind of a lot more intimate than other similar conferences. So I think the networking can be a little bit less. It's easier to do. You know what I mean? You kind of see people on an often basis, and also we've allowed long morning and afternoon coffee breaks, and we've fairly long lunch breaks. So there's plenty of time. I mean, I know that it can be quite difficult getting from one session to the other, but there is no session that needs to be missed. We've discussed, everything's recorded, and just to use the lunch and the morning and afternoon breaks to kind of just meet new people or just to connect and just use the app as well, is kind of to make those connections and see who's there and kind of just be able to start up the good conversations that you want to have.
Warwick, I've seen at conferences before where they have certain sessions that have limited number of seats. You have to use the app to register for that session or you might miss out. Is the same thing going to happen at EIC? Do we need to get on the app? Are there certain sessions that will fill up?
Well, yeah, they tend to be some, but we've, again, the agenda team, we've tried to fit the topics to the room capacities, if you know what I mean. So we kind of can predict which rooms are going to be the most, or which topics are going to be the most popular. So we've tried to schedule the most popular topics in the biggest rooms. I can't guarantee that, everybody will get a seat every time, but it's certainly not what you would see like yourself. I often used to see at RSA where there was like a long line of people outside and you weren't really sure whether you were going to get in or not. It is on a first come, first serve basis, but you should be able to make it. And I mean, if the worst comes to the worst, you don't make it, then you can just hop on your mobile device and you can watch it straight onto your device because it's live streamed. And if you have a ticket to be on site, then you have access to that, or you can catch up later. So that isn't an issue, but there is no problem of having to pre-register for anything at all. It's just kind of turn up, and I think it's first come, first serve. So hopefully that'll be relaxed, and nobody will be stressed about getting into sessions.
I love the concept of a relaxed environment like that, because I feel like no matter how many seats you might have in an auditorium or whatever the presentation is, it doesn't matter. You're always going to have a line of people just standing in the back. half the audience can be full, but you might have, a quarter, up to a quarter of the audience literally just standing in the back. They either don't want to sit or want to move up, whatever. So I love that idea of having like space rather than being jam-packed in, which is probably a good problem to have, right? Is like there is no more room. That can be sometimes challenging as well. As all right, well, we just can't fit everyone in. Go on the app and watch it instead.
Although as a moderator, I always find it so amusing that people will sooner stand at the back than come and sit in the front.
I'm one of those people. I don't know what it is. I'd rather stand in the back than be like front row staring up.
No, I don't know. Maybe there's a fear that they'll get picked on, but I mean, no, as far as I know, that doesn't happen. And from years of being kind of a journalist, I just head straight to the front because then I don't have to worry about the sound. I can, I feel like I'm there. I'm a front row person, I'm afraid. So yeah, I kind of just head there. So I was amused by the number of people who are standing in the back. Come on, Jeff, move to the front. It's actually the best spot to sit because then you can really be part of the conversation. You feel like you're really part of the conversation, and you can lip read if necessary.
All right, Warwick, I'll do it for you. I would typically support people I know and try to get up front, which is, hey, people are talking. Okay, let's do a quick lightning round before we wrap things up, because I do want to get your thoughts on a few different things. We talked a little bit about AI already, but just give me kind of a brief lightning answer to where do you see AI in cybersecurity and bonus points for things that you maybe see in the next couple of years on the identity side of things. What should people listening to this be on the lookout for?
Well, I think the main thing about AI is transparency. Is kind of and is the good thing is about it is enables visibility. So I think really the great thing about AI is that it's enabling people to kind of do things automatically quickly that they haven't been able to do before. So things like managing permissions, conflicts, and things like that. I mean, it's nearly impossible for human beings across large organizations to kind of figure out if there's a permissions clash or a conflict, or if there's a separation of duties issue or things like that. And in security, kind of pattern recognition. And we know that AI is really good at this. So while there is kind of a whole bunch of concerns about how AI is going to work against the defenders and work against business, there is also an arsenal of tools that are being developed that can enable us to do the basic stuff really well, accurately, and fast. And that's kind of hopefully going to free up people to kind of just focus on the really strategic and the really important things. So I'm really optimistic. I mean, I heard Jeremy Fleming, who's former head of GCHQ here in the UK, speaking earlier this week, and he said that on balance, he thinks that kind of AI is just going to be on the side of the defender. And I kind of, who am I? But I agree with that. And I like to think that that's true.
What's the difference between digital identity and identity and access management? This is a question we've asked multiple times to many people around the world, and I've never heard the same answer twice. So I'm curious to see what your interpretation of here's what digital identity is, and then here's what identity and access management is.
Well, I think the clue is kind of just in the words there is kind of digital identities, your identity in this kind of digital world that we now live in, because everything has an identity. So that's why this year at EIC, we're focusing on non-human identity, because just about everything that transacts has an identity. So we've got to deal with human and non-human identities. And then digital identity and access management is kind of is managing those identities. So make sure that these identities are have the correct governance around them, and that they have the correct policies around them. So I kind of see them as being very closely related. But digital identity is kind of general concept. Is about being able to kind of identify people and things in the context of a digital transaction. And the management part is just managing those identities to make sure that they're kind of fastened down and that there is correct governance and policy around them. So I don't know, maybe I've misunderstood the question, but for me, that's kind of the way that falls out in my head.
So I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. I think it's the context matters, but the way you described it tends to be how I, for the most part, will think about it. I see Jim came off mute. He must have something to say.
No, I think I don't want to make it sound negative, but I think there's like overthinking that can happen. I think the industry has decided to start calling it digital identity. It's probably a more inclusive term for more things that we now lump into identity, but I think it's just like the new way we're talking about it. I don't really think it's a new space. There's probably some additional things in it, like decentralized identity. We never thought of that as part of identity and access management. So I think you can look at it and try to analyze it and say, here's what the difference is in my mind. But I kind of feel like it's just a new name for the same thing and maybe some more things added to it.
Well, I think, you're right, but it's sort of really just the management part is part of the whole kind of concept. So it's sort of the one is a subset of the other. I mean, very much like this idea of machine identities and non-human identities. I tend to prefer the non-human identities because to me that's a more global term. It covers all identities, including machine identities. So sort of the whole thing that all non-human identity, all machine identities are non-human identities, but not all non-human identities are machine identities. So it's kind of just the one's a kind of subset of the other, really.
Yeah, I just feel like people use the terms interchangeably. And you wouldn't look at somebody strangely if they used one out of context for the other, right? Or they swap them in and out. So I'm the kind of person who will overanalyze something. And this is where I've gotten to. It's just like, people keep using the terms back and forth. And there's several other terms in our industry that, it depends on who you're talking to. My classic one is the word roles. Like the word roles means different things to different people. If you talk to an application developer or an IGA administrator, they have totally different ideas of what the term role means. And I know this is a little bit different, and then you've got IAM, you've got digital identity, and then you have identity security. So identity security is the new one. Everyone's talking about identity security. Well, I also think it's a little bit of a land grab because I always said identity is at the center, but now it's like, okay, well, we're talking about ITDR, for example. And I almost like when I talk to clients about ITDR, the same people who do traditional identity and access management, while they're providing the identity to that service, a lot of that service has to do with infrastructure, security tools that they would not control within an enterprise unless it's a very small enterprise, right? You start getting into the folks who provide infrastructure, security operations center, things like that. And, identity influences it. But so now identity is becoming bigger and bigger. And it's almost like at some point, there will not be information security. There will only be identity.
Wow, you're getting really deep, Jim.
Sorry.
Wow, I was thinking, it's like we went almost full circle. We started the conversation sort of on the MDR tip, and then we went back to ITDR and say, okay, well, ITDR is, I guess, maybe a component of MDR as well. And it's certainly influencing things now from a security standpoint. And I guess, Warwick, to kind of close off the conversation, you started as cybersecurity. How much influence has identity put on cybersecurity? Because I feel like the last, I don't know, maybe 5, maybe 10, if we're being generous, years, we've seen a lot more focus on identity being part of the security strategy and sort of thought process. Not that it wasn't there before, but it feels like almost like digital identity and IAM, whatever word we want to use, is having sort of this moment in the sun where people are starting to become, oh yeah, we definitely need to think about how we're protecting our identities because that is core to our business or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I can only agree with you. I think you're absolutely spot on there because, for years we were talking about the same in cybersecurity. We were saying you should have a kind of a risk-based approach, and now suddenly that's kind of becoming more common. And so I think all these ideas that have been kind of on the periphery for years are now coming center stage. And so, yeah, I think you're 100% correct.
Yeah,
so when does
comes onto the podcast and says, identity at the center, that's stupid. Where'd you come up with that name?
The domain name was available, Jim. That's why.
That's right.
Oh, I get it. I mean, I love it because, as I said to you at the beginning, really, to me, in many ways, identity is at the center. So that makes perfectly sense to me.
So, last question for your work. I mentioned that we're having kind of this moment in the sun, right? Our spotlight's on identity right now. When do you think that spotlight starts to diminish? Are we in a cycle of, hey, it's hot right now, and then there'll be something else, right? AI or something else will come up.
Winter's coming.
Winter's coming for identity. But, are we in a cycle where it will come back? I guess at some point in the future, like where do you see us in sort of that process?
I'd like to say that I think it's going to maintain momentum for at least a while yet. But you're right. Everything everything is cyclic. I have this whenever one asks me about cybersecurity, I always say, well, there's kind of, it's a biblical quote where there's nothing new under the sun. Everything that's been will be again. And, we'll see, everything that we've seen, we'll see it again. And so, everything is cyclic. And I mean, the Elizabethans knew this. Any Shakespearean student will tell you this, that, everything it has a cycle and everything waxes and wanes. But, surely in the digital era, I think identity is going to always be a really important topic. And especially, even if with the AI, I know there's a lot more attention on that, but AI and identity is really fascinating. So we'll hold track on that at EIC as well. So anyone interested in how that kind of relationship is working out, make sure you go to those streams. We've got some really interesting blocks there and some interesting folks.
Well, Warwick, thank you so much for spending an hour with us. I know it's a lot going on, and you're sort of in the crunch time, right, of getting things up to speed and getting things ready to go for this. I am hopeful that I'll be able to see you at the conference and give you the official Identity at the Center fist bump of gratitude for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks for having me.
We'll have our links in our show notes for people to check out. So we'll typically put our guests' LinkedIn. So if people want to reach out to you on LinkedIn, they can do that, as well as our discount codes and things like that. So thank you so much for being part of this, and we hope to have you back on. Like I said, I'm looking forward to meeting you at EIC in Berlin in just a couple of months from now. So we'll go with and wrap it up for this week. You can visit us on the web, idacpodcast.com. Scroll down on that main page, and you'll see all of our current discount codes. Let's see what else. The YouTube channel, idacpodcast.tv, will take you straight to that. Connect with Jim and I. We're always looking for guests and topics and things like that, and always happy to engage with folks who are of like minds or interests. And don't forget to subscribe, hit that subscribe button, whatever it is on whatever platform you're using. Share it with friends or enemies. That's fine. As long as somebody's listening, doesn't matter, or watching. So with that, we'll have leave for this week. Thanks everyone for watching or listening, and we'll talk with y'all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.